Hello, everyone. In this podcast, we will be discussing sensitive topics such as sexual assault. It's important to take care of yourself while listening. Some suggestions are listening while you're in a healthy headspace or knowing who you can reach out to if you become upset. Our 24/7 helpline for crisis calls based out of Central Florida is 407-500-HEAL. By contacting the national hotline at 1-800-656-4673, you can get support and learn about your local resources. There's always someone ready to help. Welcome to the Victim Service Center podcast. Here we sit down with professionals that serve survivors and victims of trauma or those who've experienced violence and have conversations about social issues. This week, we are talking about tarot, symbolism, and healing. My name is Emilie Mitchell. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the Education Coordinator at the Victim Service Center of Central Florida. With me today, I have Gabriela Herstik. Gabriela uses she, her pronouns and is a witch, author, and fashion alchemist living in Los Angeles, whose work dissects the intersection of witchcraft, glamour, and sexuality. She is the author of Inner Witch, Bewitching the Elements, and Embody Your Magick, and is working on a book on goddesses and one on sacred sex, both to be released in 2022. So Gabriela, thank you so much for being here today. We're so excited.
Oh, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
And I also have Fransheska Cardona. Fransheska uses she, her pronouns and is one of our amazing victim advocates and crisis counselors at the Victim Service Center. She received a master's degree in clinical social work from Mendez University. Fransheska has experience working with domestic violence survivors, high-risk youth, and the foster care system. She is passionate about giving the others the tools to overcome any traumatic event. Fransheska is always looking for new ways to incorporate self-care and holistic approaches. So Fransheska, thank you as well for being here today.
Thank you so much, Emilie, for having me today.
I'm super excited. As a really brief introduction, on this podcast, we have often highlighted many different ways that people can process and heal from trauma. As always, I like to mention that healing looks different for everyone, which is why I like to uplift different and unique tools people can use on their journey. So today, we will be talking about using tarot as a tool in processing trauma, addressing the stigmas and myths surrounding tarot, ways it relates to symbolism, and where someone can start as a beginner. So to start off, anyone can jump in, but what exactly is tarot?
So the tarot is a deck of cards composed of 78 different cards. We are not exactly sure where it originated from. The idea is maybe that it originated from Italy in the 14 or 1500s, though some think that it goes back a lot longer than that, maybe to Egypt, maybe to like the Kabbalistic, back into like Hebrew mysticism. But really what tarot is, it's a deck of cards that can be used for divination or fortune telling, but it's really a lot more than that. It is composed of 3 different parts: the major arcana, the minor arcana, and the court cards. Arcana is based on the word arcanum, which means secrets. And in these 3 different sections, we see archetypal symbols that represent the journey of humanity from the individual to the collective. And in the major arcana, we really see that through cards like the Lovers or Judgment or Temperance or the Wheel of Fortune or the Devil or Death, which are archetypes that even if you're not familiar with tarot, you're still probably familiar with, right? Because they're archetypes. And those are the cards that really represent major life changes, transformations, and shifts in consciousness. the minor arcana are composed of 4 different suits, kind of like a regular deck of playing cards. So there's the pentacles, the wands, the swords, and the cups, which each have a different elemental association, and they represent different parts of our lives. So the pentacles represent our home, our finances, that which exists in the physical realm around us. The cups represent our healing, our heart, our emotional world. The wands represent our will, our action, our sexuality, our passions, and the swords represent our thoughts and how we communicate and how we share and express our ideas. And in each of these cards represents or lives an energy that kind of represents like something that you might have to go through in your day-to-day life. It's not quite as big as or like life-changing events like the major arcana may be, but they're more so the stepping stones that we each experience as we move through our day, as we move through our week, our life, whatever it is. And then the last section of the tarot is the court cards, which are also divided into 4 suits of pentacles, wands, cups, and swords. And the court cards are represented by the princesses or the pages, the princes or the knights, the queens and the kings. And these represent energies that we can embody. So whether that is through, embodying these different kind of aspects of self that we might not have as naturally, or they can represent people in our life that either call forth these energies within us or embody and represent these energies. So together, the tarot is this deck of really archetypes and symbolism that we can use to read the energy of our current situation. You can use tarot to see what's going to happen, but the thing is, we have free will and nothing is cemented. Your fate is not set in stone. What the tarot reads is where you are currently, and it really acts as a mirror in reflecting energies and moments of time back at you in a way that you probably aren't usually going to see unless you practice another form of divination. So the tarot really activates these kind of subconscious pieces of ourselves and gives us more information on how we can proceed with whatever situation we're in. And beyond that, the tarot can be used for things like journaling, meditation. They can be used as talismans and rituals and spell work. So even though it's technically, a system of divination, the uses of tarot are numerous. You can use it to inspire your clothing. You can use it for artistic inspiration. And because they're really archetypal symbols, there's the way that you work with them can be as deep as you want to go. It can be something that activates a certain part of you. It can be inspiration, but it can also just be to, see what's going to happen in your day and make the most of it.
That was such an amazing definition.
Thank
you so much. I'm super excited to delve more deeper into it. You shared so many aspects of it. And I know that we'll be talking a little bit about more of those kind of myths and stigmas that you were kind of hinting at. And Fransheska, I wanted to ask you Gabriela was talking about how there's these archetypes and symbolism. So I wanted to see how, what is archetypal symbolism and how can it be helpful specifically for survivors of trauma?
So throughout history, we as human beings have learned what symbols mean to us. And when we talk about archetypes, we see them throughout mostly any religious practice. And I know we've talked about this in other podcasts as well. How faith and religion ties into healing. Well, the archetypes in tarot are no different. That's why when we talk about tarot and the myths that I know we're going to talk about a little bit in the future, they kind of tie in with the different saints and deities from other religions, because it's just the embodiment and the essence that it gives us as a person. So when it comes to trauma, especially with sexual assault, you really want something to hang on to because you feel like a big chunk of your soul has just been ripped from you. It's been taken away without your consent. And when we see, for example, a card like the High Priestess or the Empress, or in the minor arcana, I know I love the Queen of Wands. when you read the definitions of those empowered women who are like the divine goddess of light and dark at the same time, and you reflect on that and you look and you pull that card yourself, it's like a sense of, oh, I can be dark and light at the same time, or everyone goes through a healing process or a traumatic event, and it is okay. It's more of when we use archetypes, for me, it's more of empowerment, and for during the healing process for survivors to be self-sufficient, right? It is one thing for us as counselors or as advocates, or even as just a support system, to be there for someone and give them our feedback, but it's a very different feeling when you use your own tools and you realize it and you mirror, like Gabby said, yourself, what you're going through and what you're feeling.
I love this, being able to use it like as a reflective tool. And also the word empowerment is super important. Always the concept of it I like to bring in, because like you mentioned, Fransheska, sexual assault is this power and control crime, and someone's consent was taken away from them. Someone's power was taken away, and it can leave a survivor feeling powerless. And so the idea that, there's these certain cards that could empower someone, and also kind of reflecting on the hero's journey, which we'll get into a little bit too, of yes, there are these, you can relate it to so many different aspects of your life, but also reflecting that things happen and it wasn't my fault. This is what happens, and it's not what's wrong with me, it's what happened to me, and then like reflecting on the trauma. So thank you so much for that as well. And I wanted to kind of break down some myths or stigmas surrounding tarot. I think that there's so many and we can't get to all of them. But just for example, I've heard this myth that only a professional psychic can use tarot. So is there anything that you want to say as far as like addressing that? Is that true?
Oh my God, that's such, excuse my French, but like the tarot it's not like a dogmatic system. It's not that you have to be initiated to use it. It's not that you have to believe in a certain thing to use it. The tarot is democratic. It's for everybody. And if you're drawn to it, then you have every right to work with it. And I totally love what you were saying, Fransheska. Like I think that's one of the best parts of the tarot, is that you find yourself in each card. Even in the cards that feel difficult, you can find a piece of yourself. And I think that like limiting that healing and magic to somebody who like may or may not actually be legit, and it's just so limiting. It's like magic. If you feel drawn to it, then you have every right to honor that and to explore that, in my opinion.
Absolutely. I think it kind of goes back to healing too, almost as like it's individual. And we'll talk a little bit more about like different ways you can use tarot. But yeah, I love what you're saying. Like you have every right to do it how you want to do it too.
I did study clinical social work, but on a society level, tarot also has been quote unquote only used by psychics because it has been viewed as something bad. So those are tools that we have used as a society to keep people away from certain practices or certain tools. So that myth also stems a lot from that standpoint.
That's such a good point too. That stigma behind it as well. There's also this idea that maybe you can't read your own tarot. So does someone have to read your tarot for you, or can you kind of use it on your own?
I feel like a lot of these myths go back to what Fransheska was just saying, that like even like this myth that you can't read your own tarot, and that also like you can't buy like your own deck, which is like one of the biggest probably and most pervasive myths around tarot. Like they're all stemming from this like coming at it from like kind of a gatekeeping point of view, where like only certain people can work with this this divination system. So I think that saying that somebody else has to read the tarot, it's like, it is definitely powerful to have somebody who's not you and who doesn't have your own influences and like the outcome you desire in your mind reading your tarot. It's helpful. But to say that somebody else has to read the tarot I feel like it's such a disempowering way of looking at it, because there are so many ways to read the tarot and to work with the tarot, and like to limit yourself to like the time and space that somebody else has for you is just like, it feels like it's not your relationship with the cards, which if you're studying tarot, like it's your relationship. So I think it's just kind of like, these myths are just like gatekeeping. And like Fransheska was saying, there was this, there in a lot of places in the world, there's still a stigma around any kind of magic, witchcraft, spiritual, occult practice. So no, you do not have to go to somebody else to read your tarot, but if you want to, you're more than welcome to go to other people.
Love it. Love it. And kind of going off of that too, I think that gatekeeping can also include like this intimidation of like, oh, I'm going to read the cards incorrectly. There's a correct way to read the cards. So is that the case? Do you think that you can interpret the cards the way you wish, or do you what's that myth that you want to break down as far as there's only a fixed interpretation of a card?
I mean, I definitely think there are interpretations that like make sense. Like you wouldn't get a card that's like the Two of Cups and, be like, this is going to be financial ruin. Like there's definitely, there's polarity with everything, but there's no one way because these are symbolic. They're archetypal cards. And while the archetypes live in the collective unconscious, like your personal experiences and relationships of these symbols, of these archetypes are going to influence how you read them. There's no one way to read tarot. And anybody that tells you that is full of, excuse my language, but there are meanings that these symbols and archetypes have carried because they've been infused with that same meaning through thousands of years with different, millions of people working with them. Like, and also like some of these cards are experiences that we have in our day-to-day life. So we're already going to be familiar with them, like you pull the sun or the moon and you already kind of have an idea of what those mean just from experiencing them in nature. So there's no one right way to read the cards, but there are meanings that this archetypes and symbols do carry that have been infused with people reading the tarot and working with these archetypes and symbols for thousands of years.
Absolutely. And and feel free to jump in, Fransheska.
So actually that brings me to one of, and I know probably Gabby has experienced this a lot, when someone draws the 10 of Cups. For the longest time, a lot of people just thought they were going to have this fairy tale magical relationship. And then at one point, I remember I was talking to someone who also reads tarot, and she was like, not necessarily. It can mean, yes, a healthy and whole relationship within yourself, not necessarily the family. And if you look at the card, it is a rainbow with 10 cups and a happy family, but it doesn't need to signify that they're going to be second and third parties for you to feel whole and happy and loved.
I love
that's such a good point. Yeah, I feel like that's the beauty of the tarot too. Like it can really, like it's so nuanced and it's so dependent on the reader and how you're reading it and like what you're looking for. Like, I really love that example too, Fransheska. And then also like, because every single card in the tarot has like an astrological correspondence or an elemental correspondences with the court cards, like there's even more information. So like the 10 of Cups is Mars in Pisces. I think it's Mars in Pisces, which is like a fiery energy with a watery energy. So there's these layers that you can work with. And I think that a lot of the cards, even like the Lovers, which a lot of people may read as like a relationship with somebody else, it's actually an alchemical card that speaks of the union within yourself of solar and lunar, or feminine and masculine. So there's definitely layers and nuances. And like, I think that's what's so powerful about the tarot. It's not cut and dry, and you're able to like infuse whatever wisdom or like occult path or religious experience you have into it.
Kind of brings it back to empowerment, I feel like, having the power to pull out what relates to you. And then I love the way that you described, Fransheska, how, kind of having balance within yourself, and you too, Gabriela, about like the Lovers, this idea like, we have these ideas that it depends on a third party. Well, when actuality, your happiness can be found within, on your own too, which brings me back to that empowerment piece, which I love.
Yes.
you were talking a little bit about how, like, for example, Gabrielle, you were saying like the 2 of Cups, and then how this is going to show financial ruin, which is not the case, but is there this idea of there's good cards and bad cards in a tarot deck?
I personally don't think so. I do think that there are cards that are more difficult to like deal with and understand, just like human experience, right? It's a mirror. Like there are cards that I will pull that that are challenging, that force me to like look at my shit, but they're not good or bad. I think that having that just in general with magic and with any kind of esoteric practice, releasing that binary of good or bad is imperative, because when we take that away and we see everything as energy, then we are empowered to make choices that are in alignment and in service to like whatever we're doing in that moment. Thinking about them as bad, and it just like, I feel like it can kind of start like a shame spiral or like a spiral of like anxiety, like, oh no, I pulled this card, like all of these things are going to happen to me, and like that's disempowering, right? But when we see, when we pull a card, maybe like the 5 of Pentacles, which is kind of difficult and can speak of, like having to change our situation and ask for help, it can be like a mirror and be like, okay, like what do I need to do in this situation to feel empowered? How can I view this, or how can I see this, dissolution of something as the renewal of something else? Like, I think that when we shift that perspective to good or bad, to just like understanding what we can work with, it really helps take out that fear. But I mean, there are cards that are very difficult that, might rub us the wrong way, but that's the beauty of the tarot. Like when we work with these cards, we're healing that aversion and fear within ourselves, and we're coming at it from a more grounded and empowered place.
I love that. And it kind of brings me back to what you kind of addressed in the beginning of this podcast, which is this idea that the cards are fixed in the sense that there is fate and we can't change it. So is there anything else you'd like to add as far as addressing this idea of the tarot are used to tell the future and you can't change it?
I would say that anybody that tells you that is just full of baloney. Like, that's just not it. Like, the tarot reads where you are in the moment, but like every single decision that you make affects the future. Like that's with a like physics thing. So no, I don't think that the tarot reads anything that's permanent. It reads where you are in the moment based on the energy that you're presenting it with. And if you read it to have options and to like expand your perception so you can make a decision from a place that feels right for you. So no, I don't think that the tarot is like, is cut and dry. I think that's kind of just like a trope in movies and horror movies and stuff more than anything.
Right. And I don't know if there's anything that you want to add, Fransheska, as far as like any myths that you want to address as far as the tarot or anything like that.
No, it honestly, when we talk about quote unquote negative cards, normally when you say that, people automatically think about the Tower or the Devil card, and they assume it's the worst thing that's happening. And in reality, it just means it's another turn point in your life. You're going to constantly probably draw the Tower, and you might constantly draw the Devil or any other card that you feel is detrimental, when in reality it's not. It's just reflecting a situation that you need to address in a more, I think it's even in a more passive way than doing it head on. It's like, okay, so I pulled my card and it's just saying that this situation that I'm going through right now in the long run is going to make me better, or I will learn for it. Like, for example, the Tower. I remember when I first started reading tarot, I would get terrified of pulling that card.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my God, is this tower with lightning and it's crumbling? What's going to happen in my life? And maybe it was just, I lost a job where I really wasn't even that happy in, and found a better job. It wasn't nothing major, but I would psych myself out because of this myth and this belief that certain cards are extremely negative, which is not true, like Gabby was saying.
Love that. And I completely relate to that. When I first started, I also was very afraid of the Tower, but someone told me, the Tower must fall. And that kind of changed my perspective of, there are these challenges in our life and we have the power to overcome them in the way that works best for us, which kind of brings me to this other idea that we kind of started talking about, which is, the major arcana. So how do they relate to a completion of a cycle? What is the Fool's Journey? And then how can this be used for processing trauma?
Oh, such a good question. So the major arcana starts, like you mentioned, the Fool, who is going on this journey of self-realization and self-actualization. So something I really love that one of my teachers said about the tarot is like, it's not gendered, like it's not about masculine or feminine. It's about like the cards that we might see as like male or masculine are like our forces, our energies, and then the female cards are more of like the form or the container for the energies. It's not so much that you have to be a woman to connect with the high priestess, or you have to be a man to connect with the emperor. So I just want to throw that out there. But what we see in the Fool's Journey is really this like realization of the self, and we see that through the Magician, this activation of the will, and then going through the process of the high priestess, which is this feminine energy of neutrality, of stillness and like receptivity, and then pregnancy with the possibilities of life and fertility through the empress and emperor, and moving forward with this kind of inspiration to follow, to go through life. And there comes a point where, you face the tower, but the tower is really removing the false crown. It's like in the tower, you see this crown being struck off this building. And it's like, there comes a point where you have to wrestle with your ego or the ego of somebody else. And you have to realize that like that power is not it's not outside of you. It doesn't belong to somebody else. It's within you. And after the tower comes the star, which is one of the most lovely, cards in the deck, in my opinion. I'm an Aquarius, so that's my like card. So I'm biased, I have to say. But the star really, it's like you're going through this process of self-actualization. You're going on this kind of dark night of the soul journey, and you just surrender to it, and you come out of it and are divinely led, and you're, connecting to your intuition through the moon, and you see the sun, and you're able to like find this kind of energy of rebirth until you have gone through this cycle of like ups and downs of realizing that you're an individual soul, but that you're connected to something greater than yourself. And, there's 22 cards in the major arcana, and to really understand them, like you taking the time to like lay them all out and to see the journey, it's really helpful, because that way when you pull something like the Devil or the Star, you're like, okay, well, or the Devil or the Tower, it's like, okay, well, after the Devil is the Tower, but then comes the Star, or, before the Devil is Temperance, is this dissolution of these different aspects of the self. And it's like this alchemical journey of coming back into your most refined and purified soul. Like there is this, up and down kind of journey that we all go through. Like life, if it's all just good, we're never going to know how sweet it is, right? We need something to compare it to. So it really just tells the story of like the soul going through a karmic cycle of dissolution, of dissolving the different aspects of the self to be, recreated in a stronger way, for all these separate pieces of the self to come back together more fortified for the next cycle of the Fool's Journey, where he comes back as the Magician and goes through all of the cards again, but in a more empowered way, with all of the tools and elements at his disposal to create from a place of strength and power. So
that is such a beautiful way to put it. And my question is also these cycles. So I think when we look at the Fool's Journey, it could kind of us be looking at a really big journey that someone's going on. Can these also be like small cycles that are representative of like smaller events happening in our lives?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it could be anything from, like a whole life to like a whole year, but it could also be like a lunar cycle from new moon to new moon, or from like a job, right? The tarot it works with where we are. So it can be representative of something really big, and it can also be something representative of something really small. There's no kind of set there's no set container for it to be experienced in.
Awesome. And, going off of that experience, Fransheska, can you talk a little bit about how that cycle process can maybe relate to a healing journey for someone from healing from trauma, for example?
Absolutely. So let's say the Fool basically, in this case, will start right at the tower, right? We have this traumatic event that's just happened. It's going to be the same cycle. We do not tackle the trauma itself hands-on, like right the next day. We normally start by empowering and building up self-love within the survivor. So that temperance, that high priestess, that let me dissolve all these negative thoughts that I have about myself, all this shame, all this guilt, all these negative feelings. And then we go to the process of, okay, how can I build this up? How can I get back to my old self, or like I like to call it, your new self? Because the reality is, when you go through a traumatic event, it will scar you, but it doesn't mean you can't keep going. So in essence, it is a journey, and it can be represented by the cards. It's just more of a mix max of the cards, because you're starting the tower sometimes, because honestly in life, unless we go through a hardship or a traumatic event or something that just shakes the ground a little bit for us, we really don't start looking within ourselves sometimes, or we don't start developing those tools. And that's where people tend to get stuck. I ask the time when I'm with survivors, what coping skills do you have, or what do you do when you're feeling stressed? And most of the people will say, I'm not sure, or I don't know. And that's where this journey comes in. Okay, let's look for some tools. Let's build up that temperance. Let's build up that knowledge, that self-care, that love, those positive mantras. So it definitely ties into the Fool's journey, like Abby was explaining.
Wonderful. And it sounds like I could totally see how we're not always going because they're numbered, right? But we're not always going in that order, right?
Exactly.
That makes a lot of sense. Just like healing is not linear, right? Yeah. And it's different for everyone.
And I think that's the power of the archetypes too. It's that you could be anywhere on your journey and call upon any of these cards whenever you need. It's not like you have to be, going from the Empress to the Emperor to the Hierophant to the Lovers. Like, you are able to work with any of these energies whenever you need. And I think that's such a powerful way to look at them. And even reframing the cards, like the Devil or the Tower, as an opportunity to grow and to be more yourself or to heal is a really good way to put it as well. So, and I love what you were saying, Fransheska. I'm so glad people like you exist, because that is it's so powerful.
I couldn't agree more. I'm really glad that both of you, people like you, exist.
I love three of us.
I know. I love it. So we talked a lot about, the major, but what about the minor arcana? How can we kind of apply these different suits to healing as well?
Ooh, Fransheska, do you want to start, or you want me to start?
So with the minor arcana, which I have a love and hate, because sometimes, honestly, it is a little bit more difficult to interpret, at least for me, because it ties back into us as a society learning by symbols. The major arcana is very easy to interpret, but the minor arcana gets a little bit trickier. And like Gabby was saying, I normally use the major arcana for little tips and tricks, or what to expect during the day and during the week, or where should I geared my attention towards depending if I pull a cup or a pentacle. That's how I normally use the minor arcana. So if I'm in the healing process and I pull one of those cards, I would take it as maybe an extra tool that I need to do, or an extra step that I would need to take during the process. For example, if I were to pull the cups, or one of my favorites, the Three of Cups, which is a little bit more positive, I see that card really much with my friendships and my ties with my friends and my family. So if I'm in a bad spot and I pull that card, I'd be like, you know what, maybe I should stop self-secluded. Maybe I should reach out to my friends, or actually respond to that text message that's been laying in my inbox for probably 2 or 3 days because I have been feeling so depressed.
Yeah, I totally agree. I feel like the minor cards can like help us gain perspective where we either are maybe like too in a certain energy, like, you know, maybe if we keep pulling, like I mentioned, like the 5 of Pentacles, like, okay, I keep pulling this like earthy card. I can either ask for help or find balance between, you know, with this energy by doing something with like another element, because the minor arcana cards are broken up by element. Like, I think it's helpful to kind of have that framework of like, okay, well, if I'm really like depressed and lethargic and I pull an earth card, maybe I can, you know, work with something that's going to be more healing. Like I can take a bath, or I can say some positive affirmations to myself. Like, there's this kind of like balance that you get, and it can also just like reflect back at you the shit that you're going through that helps you like almost snap out of it, because you're like, oh, that is me. Maybe I should, you know, change my perspective or do something a little bit to help me get out of this kind of like perspective. And they can kind of be like a guide in like just knowing how to approach our healing for that day. Like you said, you know, if you pull that card, like the 3 of Cups, you're like, okay, like I can reach out to my friends, or I can be reminded of how much love I have in my life, or I can be that kind of friend to myself. So it's definitely like, you know, the archetypes are not necessarily as like immediate in the minor arcana, but there still are. So there's this opportunity for you to kind of get creative and see what comes out of that as well.
I love that. I think the 3 of Cups, I know that decks can be different as far as like art and stuff like that, but I always love the 3 women kind of cheers with their cups and like this beautiful scenery of like kind of like they're out somewhere just having a great time like in nature and enjoying each other. So I love the 3 of Cups too. And I also always think of my friends as well, Fransheska. Kind of leaning into using tarot as a processing tool. If there's anything else that you want to like highlight as far as that, or, you know, for example, are there specific spreads, like a tarot spread, if you want to define what that is first off, and then are any tarot spreads that you would recommend as far as, you know, healing from trauma or just in general?
Yeah. So I actually am going to recommend a book called Tarot for Troubled Times by Teresa Reed and Shaheen Moreau, which is all about like shadow work and healing with the tarot. So like literally exactly what we're talking about. And there's plenty of spreads in there in that book. I don't have any specifically on the top of my mind, but I think that tarot can be used for a lot of different ways. I feel like the ones that I would recommend just off the top of my head are through journaling, like pulling, you know, if there's a specific aspect of your healing journey that you want to maybe like confront a little bit or like understand, you can always pull cards and then journal, and just like allowing your journaling to not be a place of judgment, to not be a place of like doing it right, but just allowing it to like flow from you and using it as a cathartic kind of expression of whatever you're going through. You can also use the tarot as like a meditation tool. So like maybe if you want to, you know, heal something, you pull a card, you can use it as a way to do some like self-reflection, whether that's through breath work, seated meditation, or just like taking a walk and like kind of having that card in the back of your head and seeing how it shows up for you. And then also using it for artistic inspiration, like if you're painting or if you're making a song or if you're cooking, like seeing how you can kind of use the energy of the tarot to infuse into that, or to just like invite you to be more loving. There's definitely a lot of different ways of connecting with the cards. And I definitely found a lot of solace in like working with them as paths back to my strength after moments of like really intense, you know, pain. So that's what I've got for right now. I'm sure I'll think of stuff, you know, in 5 hours randomly, but for right now that feels good.
I love that. Fransheska, is there anything you want to jump in on with that?
So I think Gabby brings a really good point. Normally when we talk about tarot, people think about the very common cross spread. And that's the one that normally people go to. And, you know, when someone will ask me or be like, hey, do you think this will work, especially after a traumatic event? I normally tell them no. I'm like, it can be very confusing. It can be very overwhelming. I just recommend a daily pull card, especially after a traumatic event. And if you want to take it a step further, I do the 3 cards. So it would be 3 cards, left being the past, and the past can be, you know, the traumatic event that just happened, the present, how you're feeling, and the future card doesn't mean how your future is going to be necessarily. It's just what things you should do to have a more positive outcome, because you know you're stuck in this in this like bad place right now. So honestly, when it comes to healing process and spreads, I try to tell people to stay away from any complicated spreads or any spreads that involve too many cards, because it can get so overwhelming. Like, I can't imagine doing a cross spread and having the Tower, the Devil, the 3 of Swords, and like the Ace of Cups reversed. I'm just going to look at it and I'm going to be like, oh, my life is going to fall apart. And that's not what we're trying to do here. We're just trying to use it as an empowerment. So I recommend normally those 3 things.
That's such a good point. That's like, I really, daily pulls too are a really great way to learn the cards and to like embody the energy, familiarize yourself with it, and just have like some like inspiration. So I think that's such a good point. It's not, it doesn't have to be something that's complicated. And I think sometimes the more simple it is, the more we're able to like integrate those messages.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's funny. We're in sync here. Yeah. No, I agree with I do the daily polls myself. And what I love about it is it's like the first thing I do. It's like a ritual. I wake up in the morning, I do a poll, and then I think about it. And then I might go back to it later on and kind of reflect on the day too. So I love daily polls, and I agree, Fransheska, I think it could be really overwhelming because that is the first spread. So a spread is kind of just like the way you lay out the cards, and then like the positions might mean like this is this card kind of reflecting on this aspect. I wanted to ask, especially, you know, when it comes to trauma, do you find that with your clients, Fransheska, kind of like externalizing? There's a lot of internalization happening as we go through healing and things like that. So do you find like externalizing and looking at it helpful for survivors of trauma or the clients that you've worked with?
Absolutely. And a fun fact is, and I was actually talking about this with one of our other advocates, Stephen, who also uses metaphors in the healing process with the garden, with the Passion Flower Project, how many of our clients have drifted towards spirituality because the embodiment and the empowerment as a healing process. So externalizing the problems with the cards or through artwork or any other type of practice that you want really just helps the survivor look at it from a different standpoint as well. Right? I'm looking at it as something that happened in a situation, but not something that defines me as a person. And that's the key element that I absolutely love to work with. Like, yes, what happened was traumatic and was horrible and should have not happened, but that does not define you. And that I think pulling the cards to represent that is such a beautiful way of externalizing. And you were talking about this earlier, how many different decks they are, right? How many different artworks. I obviously have your typical writer deck, which is the one that you'll see mostly everywhere. But I also have a manga inspired tarot deck because I love it. One of my good friends has a Nightmare Before Christmas deck because she loves that movie. So it can also be very tailored and very personalized. And I'll have Gabby chime in real quick on oracle decks, because I have found also that people find oracle decks a little bit easier and they combine them with tarot. So Gabby, if you can explain it really, really quick with oracle decks, somewhat are.
Yeah. So a tarot deck, like I mentioned, it has a set structure. There's a certain amount of cards. And while some people and artists may take some liberties and, you know, changing the names, adding a card here or there, like what makes the tarot is the structure. An oracle deck doesn't have a set structure. It is up to the artist creating it to make the deck. So it can be used for divination. There are some specifically for healing. There are some that have affirmations. There are some that are simply for self-care. So an oracle deck is because it doesn't have this like set structure, it is a lot of the times easier to kind of like integrate into a healing practice. And it can be used in conjunction with tarot to kind of give like a theme or a flavor or just more depth to the reading. So I have oracle decks. I have one for specific goddesses. I have a goddess oracle deck. I have oracle decks for like working your light. I have oracle decks that are like sexual. Like there's an infinite amount of oracle decks. And I love what you were saying, Fransheska, like about the art, because art is so powerful and it is such a huge gateway to like the divine and to healing and to a deeper aspect of the self. And finding, I think that's also why I just detest the idea that like you have to go through somebody else to get a tarot deck, that you can't buy it for yourself. Because if the art doesn't resonate with you, then you're not going to use it and the message isn't going to resonate with you. So I think that, and that's like, I know it can be really overwhelming. Tarotarts.com has a lot of really great decks and you can often look through them. We have the internet, so it's a lot easier now to look through tarot decks, but like finding a tarot or oracle deck that speaks to you with the symbolism, like even if it's not necessarily traditional, is really, really powerful. And if you're scared of the tarot, if it feels too overwhelming, then start with an oracle deck. There are so many incredible artists that are making oracle decks. And like you could even just collage and make your own and, you know, pick themes and words that you need, like starlight or healing or rest, and like do that for yourself. So I'm really glad you brought that up because I also really love oracle decks. And like in my own daily practice, I do a seated meditation, and during that I pull an oracle deck, and then afterward I'll do my daily tarot card pulls. So I kind of have these two different energies that I work with throughout the day. So highly recommend both of them, but oracle cards are definitely also a great option.
Yeah, thank you for uplifting that about oracle decks. I actually am not very familiar with them, and I just love, as we're talking about this, that you both are sharing just how versatile this tool can be and how individualized it can be. And you can use it and pair it with meditation. You can use it and pair it with like self-care. So I love this. I wanted to ask, you know, specifically, do you find that tarot has been becoming more and more popular or widespread lately?
Oh my God, yeah. Sorry, Fransheska, I saw you were starting to say something. Please share.
No, I was saying in my mind, definitely. I've seen it, like we said, with clients who normally, you know, they're sometimes a little bit hesitant to say like, oh yes, I have a religious view, but I don't want to talk about it. And then when you dig deeper, they're really into tarot. And I did find a couple of like super valuable information, especially during the pandemic where mental health resources, you know, couldn't keep up with everyone, right? Especially with people losing their jobs, health insurance, all those, you know, macro system problems. You being able to buy a tarot deck on Amazon, maybe for $10, and pull a card and make yourself feel better for the day is extremely helpful. I'm not saying it will obviously solve every single problem that you have, but it is an amazing tool to have, and it's been more accessible. And back to what Gabby was mentioning, we have the internet now, right? So even if you don't understand it, you can go on the internet and Google kind of what the card means, and you're obviously self-aware of your situation, so it's going to resonate to what you're going through. And TikTok has a whole thing of tarot and magic, so that's another thing. I do see it becoming very popular, not only with the Gen Zs and the millennials, but actually an older crowd, which was very surprising to me as well.
Yeah, I definitely feel like we've been going through a tarot renaissance. Like that started probably like 6 or 7 years ago. Like I've just seen so many more decks and so many more like creative decks and so many decks that are more diverse, because the Rider-Waite deck is like white, skinny, cis, straight people, you know, like there's so many different kinds of like new tarot decks, like the melanated tarot deck, like Rachel True's tarot deck, the True Heart tarot deck. Like there's such an array of cards, and there's some cards that don't even feature anybody. So I definitely feel like the internet is allowing us to not only access these things, but like as we continue to kind of bust these myths that, you know, you have to go through somebody else to get a tarot deck, or that you can't read yourself, so that the tarot is only going to be becoming more popular. And like, it's been around for so long, and there's so much wisdom in the cards. Like the major arcana tarot cards are called keys. They're the tarot keys. And they are keys. They unlock something within you. And I love seeing the spread of tarot. Like I have a whole shelf of tarot decks, and like I'm constantly buying them. Like I don't even care. I use them. I love them. Like they really help with perspective and with healing. And I think that, like, for me, like I love reading the tarot and I love working with them, but I don't really like reading for other people. I don't really love, like, I offer that service sometimes, but for me, it's really a tool of self-reflection and introspection. And it's a tool that I use more magically than anything else. So I love seeing the ways that artists interpret the tarot. I love how accessible it is. And I love seeing people use it in a variety of ways. And like, yeah, there's no religious connection. Again, there's no dogma. So like you can be Catholic and work with tarot. You can be Muslim. You can be, atheist. Like there's nothing stopping anybody from picking up a deck.
I love that. I love you saying tarot renaissance. That is like my favorite combination of words ever now.
I know.
That was so incredible. I'm going to jump around here a little bit with our questions, because I think this kind of leads to this idea that, is there an incorrect way to use tarot as it's becoming more widespread and used? Is there like a wrong way to use it?
I feel like the only thing that comes to mind is like if you're using it to hurt other people, which the thing with like any kind of esoteric practice is that like there's no one set, unless you're following a specific religion, like there's no one set of like moral ethics that you have to follow. Like, like having your own kind of guiding beliefs is what's going to influence you to like use tarot in a positive or maybe more negative light. So like if you're using the tarot to like, hex or curse somebody, if you're using it to fear monger, like I would say that that's wrong, but like that's my moral perspective framing those opinions. So like I don't condone that stuff at all, unless it's like, a spell of like using the justice card to like maybe get justice at like somebody who, like hurt you. But there's no wrong way to use the cards. Like I mentioned, I think that's one of the incredible things about the tarot is like, you can use it for divination. You can use it for meditation. You can project yourself into the card and like do like a scrying or path working with the card. You can create art around it. Like you can journal around it. You can dress like the card and embody it. So I think that's what's so incredible about it. It's like your creativity is the limit.
I love that. And kind of leaning into how it can be mindful. I wanted to see, Fransheska, if you know any mental health practitioners, you, Gabriela, as well. Do you know any mental health practitioners that use tarot in their practice, or have there been any studies that highlight how tarot can be a mindful activity, kind of like the mental health aspect of it?
I do follow, she was a clinical social worker as well. Her name is Jessica Dorr, and she has amazing writings on how to use tarot within the clinical. And I know Gabby mentioned it earlier. When we look at Jung's theories, they're very much tied into archetypes and symbolism used for the mental health, especially when we talk about shadow work in the shadow self, which is, I like calling it CBT for the soul, basically. That's kind of how I like explaining it, but the cards are very much used.
Can you describe exactly what like that shadow self is for those who may not be familiar with it?
Of course. So in theory, shadow work and the shadow self are those negative aspects that we have within ourselves. And sometimes we don't really want to face them. So for example, if I feel I am a jealous person or I'm jealous of someone, instead of trying to push that back, I should face it and look myself in the mirror. Okay, I'm jealous of Emily, but why am I jealous of Emily? What does Emily have that is making me feel this way? And come to the realization that maybe it's not that I envy you per se, I envy your happiness or what you're radiating, and it makes me look into myself and be like, okay, I can understand why I feel jealous, because Emily looks just so happy and vibrant every day. So that just means I'm unhappy right now and I have to work on that. So that's kind of how the shadow self work. Very powerful, a whole nother podcast for that.
Yeah, I think
it's
so.
really good work.
Yeah, and like CBT being cognitive behavioral therapy, right? And
yes.
So, okay, and I can see how those are kind of like.
So it relates, because in CBT we kind of look to that negative thought that we have not impact into a negative action or a harmful action, and the emotion. So when we do shadow work, oh yes, I'm having this negative emotion, but what I'm not going to do is resort to a negative thought or a negative action to cope with that negative emotion. Yeah, I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, kind of how we can kind of change certain behaviors and stop kind of a thinking process that's more of like rumination. I love that aspect of like the shadow self and kind of facing it. I think that a lot of people can relate to, you know, if we kind of ignore things, like it can fester, but if you kind of face it and, you know, no shame, right? Let's look at it without shame and just no judgment. And then we can kind of move past it. I think that it has less power over us then. And it's kind of going back to that empowerment piece. You know, we talked a lot about like a survivor using tarot as a tool to process their trauma. Before they do that, and you had a really great tip already, Fransheska, of kind of, you know, not starting really with a big Celtic spread, but maybe is there anything else that a survivor should keep in mind as in regards to remaining safe as they approach using tarot as a tool? And then how do they know if they're ready?
That's an excellent point. It goes back to what Gabby was saying. First of all, if you feel drawn to it, absolutely go for it. And if you're not, that's absolutely cool as well. I think art also plays a really big piece in it. I've seen, you know, decks that are just flowers or garden, or even just like gold lines. So when using that, make sure you look at a deck that really inspires you. Like if you love garden, go for that flower deck and sit and resonate with those cards. Just do like a daily pull, and know that if you feel overwhelmed at one point, it's okay to stop. I feel also people think that once they start pulling tarot cards, they have to do it every day for the rest of their life, and it has to be so consistent. And that's not the case. It's like with any coping skills. Sometimes it's just not going to work that day, and that's okay as well.
I love that, giving yourself that permission, and also like giving yourself that boundary too. Maybe you're like, I'm ready to use tarot for my healing journey. And then you're like, you know what? I'm feeling a little overwhelmed. I'm going to back off. You have every right to revisit what works and what doesn't work for you. And it could be different every day. And I love that, Fransheska. I know, Gabriela, you already kind of had all these really wonderful tips as far as how people could start if they, you know, are interested, but maybe it's like overwhelming. And you already gave that fantastic book, specifically Tarot for Troubled Times and things like that. Is there, you know, something similar that someone can do for like as a beginner? I know that we talked about like pulling a card a day or something like that. Any other tips that you want to give for someone who's interested but might feel a little intimidated, especially with the stigmas of gatekeeping and things like that?
I definitely suggest doing a single card a day, and like starting a tarot journal and journaling about your experience and like what the card brings up. Pulling the card in the morning specifically is really good, so that way you can see the way the energy manifests throughout the day. And also like taking the tarot deck and like laying it out from beginning to end. So like you can make what's called the tarot tableau. So you'll take the 22 major arcana, you'll put them in order 1 through 20 or 0 through 22. You'll take out the Fool, you'll set him aside, and then you'll make 3 rows of 7. You'll have from the Magician to the Chariot, Strength to Temperance, and then the Devil to the World. And you put them in a line, and you can kind of like look up and down it and see the ways these cards interact with each other. And then you can also line up the different minor arcana cards as well, from Ace to 10. And then the court cards as well, from Princess or Page to the Kings. And like just like looking at them and kind of seeing the story sometimes helps you have like the bigger perspective with them. But I definitely suggest doing the one card a day. And like, yeah, like, getting tarot books. The woman who wrote, that co-authored Tarot for Troubled Times, Teresa Reed, known as the Tarot Lady, is an excellent resource. She has a podcast. She has a Patreon. She's written multiple books, and she's just an amazing person. So I have to give her a shout out. Like, she really puts out a lot of free information about tarot, and using Instagram, using TikTok, like allowing yourself to be a beginner. And like, again, if it doesn't resonate, like Fransheska said, like there's nothing, like you did not make a pact with these tarot cards to like do it every single day. Maybe you did, that's cool too, but like you're allowed to take time for yourself. If it doesn't resonate, you're not committing to anything. So I think like having that kind of curiosity and like taking out the like rigidity of it and like the rigid expectations of the self is really helpful. And yeah, pulling one card a day maybe, or maybe like doing 2 cards a day when you feel ready, and journaling about your experience, maybe making your tarot card for your day like the lock screen or home screen on your phone so you connect with it. Like they're all those like little ways of like infusing the energy into your life, I think is really, really powerful.
I love that idea. I actually have pulled cards, and I love the star. So whenever I get the star, I like to reflect on it like all day. And so if I pull it, I might like set it on my desk and just keep revisiting. I love that idea of the lock screen. And speaking of books, I wanted to see if you could talk a little bit about like the books that you've read and that you're writing, I should say, and the books that you've created and you've authored, and where can people find them and where can people find you?
Yes, so I am the author of Inner Witch, a modern guide to the ancient craft, Bewitching the Elements, a guide to empowering yourself through earth, air, fire, water, and spirit, and Embody Your Magick, a guided journal for the modern witch. And I'm also going to be releasing 2 books next year, one on sacred sexuality and one on working with different goddesses and embodying goddess energy. So my work is really rooted in empowerment and self-empowerment. It's really rooted in being accessible to people of all levels, of all backgrounds, and it's really a way of creating a path of my work really focuses on creating a system, path, practice of magic that is personalized and that feels resonant for you, whether that's working with the different elements or whether that's, working with something like tarot or creating a journaling practice. I am very Aquarius, which means that when somebody tells me to do something, I don't want to do it, even if I wanted to do it before they told me to do it. So like, none of my work is like, you have to do this to be a witch. You have to do this to practice magic. It's all about finding the things in your life that already feel magic for you, whether that's art or math or running, and like bringing awareness and bringing the tools of witchcraft and magic to that to create a powerful current of energy that you can use to transform your life and to heal. So you can buy my books on Amazon. You can buy them on bookshop.org or whatever. You can buy them at your local bookstore, which is always my suggestion. And they're like they're on the internet. They're published, in different languages too. So Inner Witch and Bewitching the Elements are both in Spanish. Inner Witch is in different languages as well. And my goal is really to like make magic accessible for anybody who feels drawn to it, and to make witchcraft something that people can weave throughout their lives to feel empowered and connected to something larger than themselves.
I absolutely love that. I'm super excited to read them. I'm so
Thank
excited.
You.
And you're just so inspirational, both you and Fransheska, of course. And I also just want to like uplift and that concept of it being accessible, because like we were mentioning in the beginning, I feel like there's this idea of like this gatekeeping thing of like, there's a right way to do it and a wrong way to do it. And I think we can absolutely apply that to healing. There's a right way to do it and a wrong way to do it. And it's like everyone's journey is different. Everyone's full journey looks different. It's not always linear. And we're constantly coming back to it too. Yeah. So I appreciate both of you today. I just wanted to, as a final kind of question for you all, is there anything else that you would like to bring up that we may not have addressed, or if there's anything that you'd like to say specifically to survivors out there?
Just that you got this and that you're doing great, and that like having self-compassion is everything. Like you're here, you're breathing, you're taking it a day at a time, and like using the tarot as a way to remind yourself of your power is really, really powerful. And even if it's not the tarot, I just hope that you find something that allows you to like recognize your inner strength, because even when you don't feel like it, it's still there, and like your commitment to your healing is just such a reflection of that. So whether it's music or tarot or journaling, like I hope that you're able to find something that reminds you of your power, and that you're able to tap into that in whatever way resonates. But no, we talked about so many of my favorite things, and thank you, Fransheska, for your wisdom and for your insight. Like I'm so glad that there's people like you that are helping people heal. It's so important, especially right now.
Thank you so much. I think this is one of the most exciting highlights of my career, obviously, doing this podcast. I really believe in a holistic approach, both medical, but with self-care. I really believe that little life changes can go a long way within the healing process. And it helps it be a little bit easier. And I don't want to use the word consistent, but it keeps us a little bit more on track, if that makes sense. And yeah, no, Emilie, thank you for having us. You did amazing.
Thank you so much for uplifting this amazing conversation. I am super passionate about this. And so I kept telling everyone, like, I'm going to do a podcast on tarot. And they're like, when is it coming out? When is it coming out? I'm like, it's coming out. I'm so excited. So thank you so much, both of you, for being here today. And I want to just thank the listener for listening to the Victim Service Center podcast. The VSC is a nonprofit organization that provides free confidential counseling services for victims of any kind of trauma in Central Florida. So to learn more about our services, please visit victimservicecenter.org. And to everyone listening, healing is not linear and you are not alone. And thank you so much again, Fransheska and Gabriela, for joining me today.
Thank you.